Well, good afternoon. I'm so excited to welcome you to the gallery. My name is Patricia Ruiz-Healy. For the people that don't know me, I'm the director of the gallery, and I'm so excited to have Leigh with this show. It has been a very fantastic journey, and we are so excited about your leaving us for Berlin for 3 months. That's going to be such a good opportunity for you to expand your work and just concentrate, and we're very happy that you're doing that and congratulate you. So we're just doing a talk. It's going to be very casual. We're welcome any questions. I'm going to start asking Leigh for some questions, and let's see how it goes. It's just a little dialogue. And so the first one that I'd like to ask you, how long have you been making art that addresses genetic modification issues? And how did you get interested in this topic?
I've been making it probably about 15, 16 years. I got interested in it because I started getting intrigued with the idea of being able to test for genetically inherited diseases. So the genetic aspect, when it came up in regards to plants, that piqued my interest. So I had done a body of work that was about inherited family diseases, and they were family portraits.
Family, like realistic portraits? You mean?
No, they were based on, say, lung cancer or ovarian cancer. I would do the body part that was affected. I would do stitchings, embroidery pieces. Back in a particular time, that was considered something that was cherished and an heirloom, and it was passed on and down through the ages. As a family pride, as was the disease that the family carried as well. So that whole body of work was done, and then being interested in genetic testing, I then started seeing genetic modification articles and just went down that rabbit hole instead. So
that's great. Can you talk a little bit more about your art? You know, how it morphs and builds off previous works. Can you elaborate a little bit more on this?
I'm not sure.
Morphing, you know how you talk about your work, how it morphs, it goes from one plant, and then from that plant you go into a more elaborate.
Well, I got my degree in painting, and so that when I would do portraits of people, but there are always these kind of tangential object references that were that I created a connection of the object with the person. That always that underlying kind of theme of the work was always about the fact that people present an exterior version of themselves, but interiorly there are things going on, and so the objects that I would attach with the portraits of the people always sort of created that dialogue. So I think there was always that interest in sort of the morphological presentation of things, the physical presentation of things, then being what's actually happening underneath. So in a way, my work hasn't changed at all. It's just changed in the subject that I'm doing it of. With my interest in genetic modification, I started playing with the idea of sort of you see this plant, but there's a lot of turmoil going on because of the ability of being able to manipulate them that way through science. So then it just manifested itself in taking particular types of plants. I do a lot of research on their the way that they propagate, their geographical, environmental situations, and then tried to take the physical attributes and then blend them into one plant. that made itself obvious, or it presented itself visually in my work by layering them on top of it. I had the clear, you can see through some of these. Some of them are just on the front and the back, but I've gone back to the layering way of making my work. Am I even answering the question?
Yes, you are. This is good. This is all good information.
Yes, so then eventually I ended up, through the course of the body of the work, after having done the research on the disparate plants that are put together, I ended up finally resolving them into actual individual plants growing from the same source, because when they were layered, they still were entities unto themselves, and they were visually blended. And so once I moved to a realized plant, then that, with all that research in it and the different time frames, I'm interested also in the scientific knowledge that we have in particular times through the scientific method, if you will, although that was, kind of 1600s, 15. But that how the presumption of the encompassing knowledge, all the knowledge that you think you have, in fact, gets disproven by more technology that we know. So people are doing these things, and they're very helpful, genetic modification, in a lot of ways of putting in vitamins or creating a plant that's resistant to diseases or however they end up doing it. And then you end up having the pollinization of crops that aren't genetically modified, so the containment aspect of it is difficult as well. So then taking that resolved plant, the plant that's growing out of one source, I then ended up taking that as source material. Okay. And this body of work is now generational pieces from that source plant, or from other layered plant drawings that I've done.
And one of the sources, one of the plants that are sources is the one at the end of the hall. So maybe when we finish talking, you can go and take a look at that work that was done in beginning of 2014 or mid 2014?
12, I think.
Oh, 2012. Okay.
And so I'd done that's a generational piece of one that was, but that one's layered again. Then I had the resolved one that I had done in 2010, I think, and it was a large graphite piece. A lot of times I'm interested too in creating a realistic depiction, a visual specimen, so that the presumption is that it would be viewable in reality. But then as you look, you see it's sort of presented as a house of cards. It's not, it would topple over, or a piece would break off potentially. And so then I sampled from that piece to create this piece. Now, these are all very straightforward depictions, that one and the beginning one and then the other ones, but now I'm starting to take those drawings and manipulate them in the computer so that I either stretch them, I drain the color out of them, I process them through a filter, and then the filter ends up creating these pure color cells, which all the cells that you see on here are sourced from my earlier drawings. So depending on the size you want the cell to be, the distance between the cells, it ends up changing. I like the fact that it's very difficult to grab on. If you end up liking one of the cellular manifestations, you should save it, because if you end up going back to the original straightforward drawing, it could change the cellular construction to a different one. So I like the fact that it's not... It's
movement. It's all about moving.
It's very elusive. So, which again is another... there are some pieces back there, I think, the carbon paper pieces.
Yes.
Once again, talking about the technology that we had and a cheeky little nod to the way that you would make a copy. What is a copy? And back in the day, you used carbon paper as a copy.
Yes.
And so I took that and then ended up having the same source plan if you look at the drawing, and it is the sort of base of it is the same, but if you look at each of the 4 drawings, they all have different off-growths. So it's an ironic imitatio perfecta, ironically saying a perfect copy. So again, just the inability to contain the thing. It's the fact that you're sort of drunk with the ability to be able to do these things, and yet what's the aftermath or the after effect of it? Can it be contained? Nature has never been able to contain us, you know. Or we've never been able to contain nature, sorry.
Do you feel that your art comments on the possible consequences, both positive and negative, of advancements of technology and genetic?
I try to let people, I have my own personal opinions. I just spoke of like the sort of being drunk on the possibilities. I try to create these things that I think potentially are very hazardous, personally, to be beautiful. I want them to beguile you. The very idea, the beauty of the ability to do these things, to the pushing of seeing how far you can go with it. So I want you to be drawn in and then kind of consider what you're looking at. It is, you know, straightforward botanical, but then there are sort of little schisms and hiccups and lacks of connectivity through some of the flow and the line of the object that's being presented. So ask me the question again. I'm not sure. I kind of skirted around it, I feel like.
Do you feel that your art comments on the possible consequences, both positive and negative, of advancement of technology and genetic modification?
I think I'm probably making it for it because it's beautiful, but no, I don't think I hit you with the hammer to do it. You know, I feel like plants themselves are very sentient beings. They're just not, I always say this, they're not as loud or quick as we are. But I mean, you know, it's amazing to me that I can take a tendril in my garden and wrap it around, and by the time I come out later in the afternoon, it's muscled itself even tighter onto the thing that I've directed it towards, you know. Or it'll let go, too, which is very kind of wonderful.
When you were growing up in Louisiana, were you exposed to nature in a very direct way? Were you like a garden person? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
No, I did. We had a turnip field out in back of right over our gate, so we would climb that and go play in the dirt, and now it's a developed neighborhood. I've traveled a lot with my family going camping, so yeah, I would say definitely it was a big part of my upbringing to be interested in that, you know. But and I probably have always made art. My mom was an artist, so you know, here and there, and then like the grody little, remember all those little dot letters like in the 80s, how awful they were, and the painting craze of doing, like you know, in like 8th grade I really got into doing horrific t-shirts and sweatshirts and things like that, you know, sweatshirt dresses. It was always part of it, you know. I guess, I mean, we went to museums, but it wasn't a regular thing doing that. It was more, you know, the culture that I experienced was typically a nature culture.
Did you discover botanical drawings, like, you know, English botanical drawings from the 18th century in a visit to a museum, or how did you stumble upon the subject matter?
Well, again, just genetic modification in the news, and then eventually I started getting interested in collections of botanicals, and herbariums and the medical books and how those were sort of your pharmacological, pharmaceutical capabilities and possibilities back then. So, and I don't, so no, I mean, I've got through books, and in Berlin I'm planning on going to, there's one of the best, at least in Europe, botanical gardens in Berlin, and they also have a botanical museum, so they have a lot of specimens that I'm hoping to be able to see. I think I'll be able to see them in the museum, but I'm also interested in looking at galls, which are aberrations or mutations, and they have a lot of specimens of those. I'm intrigued by plant fossils. They're not very readily available. It's whenever things like a lack of oxygen would manage to seal the plant in, and that would allow the fossil to happen. So they have some fossils there, so I'm hoping to look at that. But no, to your question, I think.
Yes, it's good.
Yeah.
It's all good. It's all good. Can you tell us a little bit more about your technique? I mean, your work is such a process-oriented, so meticulous. You go into different layers of very elaborate work. It's just, I think the public will benefit if you can just share with us more about your technique, or how do you start?
Giving away my secret.
Just, share whatever you can.
Well, the nice thing is, before the technique involved the drawing, and again, like there's one piece that I did that was four different layers, four different pieces framed individually. It was the same four plants in each one, and I alternated them to create a recessive dominance kind of feeling about it. And for me, doing those drawings, even though I had a source plant, the same plant, I like the fact, again, the copy, it was hand done, personal mistakes. So the inability to have it be the exact same drawing every single time. So that was a little whoopee moment for me for that. And then let's see, I was on a train, I've lost it. So doing that research and doing the research on the beginning drawings that were the original source things, that's kind of fallen to the wayside a bit. It's still there because it was done originally, so I've got these disparate things for their various clashing abilities. And so now it's about how can I change the visual manifestation. So that typically is now done in the computer. But then once it's done in the computer, then I end up taking that image and then drawing that image onto it. It's done with a mechanical pencil, smallest graphite little tube that you can get, 0.03. And then the cellular pieces again are done in the computer in a program through a filter, and then that's colored as well. It's colored on both sides because I want it to be a really saturated color. And what's turned out sort of nice is they almost are velvety, you know. I mean, and now I'm interested in incorporating a little more visceral attributes to it. So you'll discover on a few of these pieces they have paint dollars. So they're still in this sort of cellular shape, but they're starting to kind of change and be a little more oozy and primordial and visceral.
Okay, that's good. Fantastic. Do we have any questions?
Okay, if you don't, please don't.
Again, is your work influenced regionally by the plants from a specific region or area you're at?
I've done I'd had a sculptural piece called, it was based off of Al Richter's A Large Turf, and so it was, now that title of that piece is like a great turf, a large piece of turf. I call it a large turf. But it was one of the first natural setting botanicals that had been done. It was always sort of like my work, or this piece, that it's a specimen kind of presentation. You know, you rip it out of the ground or you draw it plein air. And he actually showed them in their natural settings. So it's, so I did a regional version of that where I had hand sewn, again, sort of handmade, man-made objects that look like the Johnson grass that you see out, or the tall little sort of mustard weeds that we have here. So I did a Texas version of that, and then ended up having a mutated plant in the mix of that, so that it was sort of the idea that it would be in the environment and eventually discovered. And it's all clear plastic vinyl, so again, beauty comes into play, and the kind of alluring beguilingness of it being gem-like and sparkly. And then the mutated plant had one color zap on it that was done with silk thread. And so that, I have it kind of all contained in the space, and then it eventually, that one little vivid Wizard of Ozzy kind of thing, Munchkin Land, is off into like almost the 3D space, even though the sculpture is 3. I see it almost sort of coming out into the viewer's space a little bit more. I mean, being a painter, I always kind of have that difficulty connecting, going full on, you know, free balling kind of 3D, you know. It's always a struggle for me to make it be 3D all the way. So I always think of it 2D. And then also I've done some drawings that were based on pharmacological abilities in plants, and then sort of deviously had them be bad mixtures of whatever drugs you would take now, but it was the past version. But that wasn't necessarily regionally to Texas, although the pieces are in Texas.
I have a quick question. Who taught you the computer? How to use the computer? Or did you create this computer program to do this?
Oh, no, it's just Photoshop. But it's like anything. I think curiosity. I mean, I learned because I was doing website stuff for the job that I have, and then you just start seeing what you can do. Yeah, I'm like, oh, that button's kind of cool. How did I do that? And then you hope you can find your way back to it. But, you know, and I'm constantly discovering new ways to play with it, which are probably old ways that everybody's already played with it in the first place. But they're new for me. So yeah, just curious. And I don't know, artists in our heart of hearts, I think, are just problem solvers in a way, you know. The artist nodding. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Yes.
I'm always interested in your work in the composition. I mean, I think the content is always so exquisite, and I love starting to see the sort of morphing of the organic and the synthetic, right? Even in the way they're presented, the color of the black and white, organic shapes.
Right.
And I'm always interested in the way nature tends towards symmetry, right? For the most part, not in all cases, but majority, you know, it's symmetrical. Growth is usually symmetrical or even sort of, or even radial. But your compositions have a lot of asymmetry, and I always find that very exquisite about the work. And also kind of how you use negative space. So I don't know if that's something that you feel like you organically move through, or is it an influence from somewhere, or what do you think?
So you just mean that for the drawings then?
Yeah,
and
well, yeah,
so,
yes, I would say
yeah.
more so for the flowers, absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah. But I mean, looking at all of these, they really are, they're very asymmetrical, and even when you have something towards symmetry, it's a little off.
Right,
In
yeah.
terms of its balance and how you use negative space to sort of balance out a lot of the density.
Yes.
So I don't know if you tend to sort of feel your way through that, or do you keep
I don't think I'm as conscious as maybe I should be about it, but I do. There's a lot of nesting on things, you know, and looking at them and negotiating with them. So I guess without it being conscious, that is actually happening. It's just it feels instinctive to me instead of saying that. And they can change too. I mean, some of these pieces were visually how I expected them to look at the end. They never actually looked just as they should. And then I decide that the layers will change too. And then the cut paper pieces may be more about the negative space and the light and the things that can happen through manipulating the light source or how it can become more full-bodied, again, that 2D, 3D thing that I have where it ends up creating more of a volume to it.
Great. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Do you think you might ever address in your work genetic modification in living things other than plants?
I've been asked that a lot, and a lot of people already do that. And for me, I think I want to see how far I can go with just sticking with the plants. I mean, even though I cite as an example of putting like a flounder gene in a tomato so that it doesn't freeze, you know, I mean, I could put a flounder thing. And sometimes people do actually see particular sort of other species manifestations or other, I think, family manifestations in them. And I welcome that. I'm okay with that, with it maybe finding its way there, but I'm more seeing myself as an advocate for the plants, which sounds so horrific and cheesy, but I think it's almost like the potter who makes the same pot 1,000 times so that they can perfect it. I'm probably doing the looking glass version of that, where I want to see how, starting from the one thing to that one to the multi-generational things of how far, I mean, it could be so completely unidentifiable as a plant by the time I'm finished with it, but it's still, the source is the same. So no, I'm not at this point. There are just, you know, other people doing it. And I'm trying, and this sounds heavy-handed again, as much as cheesy being an advocate of the plants, is that I'm trying to create sort of a new botanical, a new version of the botanical, the books that I have gobs of, thousands of at home. That's how does, with this technology of this time, how is that visually presented? And so this is my version of that kind of botanical.
Yes.
No question, but just a comment. It sounds Darwinian.
Yes, absolutely.
Very Darwinian.
Yes.
In a different era.
Yeah.
And I mean, the very thing, the hubris of scientists, not hubris, because there's something exciting about it, but the hubris of scientists that I'm, in my own way, being just as obnoxious about, or as hopeful about it. So.
Yes.
So you mentioned that part of the reason, or the beauty in the work is to kind of demonstrate or show the beguiling and seductive nature or attraction of the genetic manipulation of these plants. Is there some element to your work that you think demonstrates or illustrates the more cautionary side of like the possible negative outcomes of
I feel like they're really subtle things where it's the skeleton of the leaf, or it's like on the one on the other side of this one, there's sort of pollinization of the cells that are flying off, and it's starting to sort of unravel itself a bit visually. But again, I'm not saying that it wouldn't eventually find its way to being more heavy-handed in a lot of the things that I'm thinking about maybe doing doing in Berlin are a little messier. So I think.
Well, I think it's attractive or to me, it's more interesting that it's not more heavy-handed.
Right.
That it leaves it open.
Yeah.
But I was just wondering.
Yeah. I always think that I'm really busting loose with my chains, and that I end up, and because I'm so anal in the work, and I think I'm doing it, and then I stand back and look at the show, and I'm like, still anal, you know. So that's so I'm kind of. I just hope that I can stick to my guns when I'm in Berlin. Not saying that I couldn't be sticking to my guns here, but there's a real luxury of having your living space, working space, and being able, and not having some of the responsibilities to really kind of, and hopefully nobody coming in too soon to see it. You know, I get nervous about stuff, yet I always feel like somehow I should be the one to resolve it, and then once I've gotten it resolved, then I want, like, let guns fly kind of thing. Sometimes I'll get defensive, but I really do like to hear what things that I hadn't thought of, or that they see a problem with too, because it can be hard sometimes to have a real honest overview of what you do.
So you don't do a lot of collaborating with them?
I don't play well with others, no, not really, but I mean, I don't know. I've had people wanting to collaborate with me. and you know, I'm open to that, but it's just, it's not a comfort play. I never studied with people when I was growing up either, so that could maybe the genesis of that. But. Okay.
How do you decide when to stop on a piece? How do you know when it's complete for you?
It's instinctive, I guess. I mean, and again, I may have it printed out and hanging up for months, weeks, and I'm like, and then I might have worked on another piece, and that'll inform that one, so then it ends up getting altered a little bit. So, and whenever I get it figured out, yeah, there's no answer to that. There's no definitive answer to that. So it does keep playing. But in a lot of cases, these are as they are, but it still ends up getting shifted, or I may add something else. Yeah. So it's.
Any other questions? Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you, Leanne, for taking the time. This has been really wonderful, and we wish you the best of luck for your residency. Thank you.